made it bloody?
The fugitive grandma, Houston's quietest secret. At her 80th birthday party, surrounded by gospel music and laughter, a grandmother's face flickers across the TV news, not as a celebrated matriarch, but as a fugitive wanted for a double homicide from half a century ago. Before we get into the case file, just a quick note. If stories of hidden motives, dead ends, and unexpected turns are your thing, make sure you're subscribed. Hit the bell so the next mystery finds you first. Now, let's open the file. The August heat pressed down on Houston like a fist, the kind that made the air shimmer over the asphalt and turned every front porch into a stage for gossip and fans. Lorraine Jacobs sat on the patio in her favorite wicker chair, wrapped in a soft lavender shawl despite the heat, because that's what made her feel dignified. 80 years old today, and she still commanded respect. Her daughter, Denise, fussed over the food trays. "Mama, you want another plate? We got catfish, mac and cheese, collards. Don't play like you don't see them collards." Lorraine chuckled, showing the slight gap in her teeth that made her smile warm but mischievous. "Denise, I'm full. You gonna have to find somebody else to feed." The yard was packed with family children darting between chairs, cousins arguing over dominoes, teenagers sneaking pictures for Instagram. A DJ spun old-school soul on borrowed speakers, Marvin Gaye bleeding into Frankie Beverly. To the neighbors passing by, it was just another black family barbecue, but to the Jacobs clan, it was sacred. The matriarch had made it to 80. Marcus, the eldest grandson, leaned in to kiss Lorraine's cheek. "Happy birthday, Big Mama. You good?" "I'm blessed," she said. "Don't let nobody tell you otherwise." But when she shifted her eyes toward the street, a flicker of unease passed over her face, quick and thin as lightning. Inside, the living room buzzed as kids sprawled across couches, flipping channels on the big flat screen. The news anchor's voice cut in over a crime update, some segment nobody was paying attention to. FBI is renewing its search for Evelyn Price, the last surviving suspect in a 1976 armored truck robbery outside Chicago. Price, now believed to be in her 70s or 80s, has evaded capture for decades. New forensic analysis has uncovered photographs placing her in Houston in the early 1980s. Authorities urge anyone with information to come forward immediately. The screen showed a black and white mugshot. A young black woman with piercing eyes, cheekbones sharp as glass. And though the photo was grainy, unmistakably, it was Lorraine. The room froze. Even the children sensed the air thicken. Denise walked in carrying a tray of cornbread, and when she saw the TV, the tray slid from her hands, clattering to the tile. "Mama," she whispered. Lorraine hadn't moved. Only her hand trembled slightly against the shawl. Marcus turned to her, voice low but urgent. "Big Mama, what the hell is this?" For a moment, Lorraine closed her eyes, as if she could erase 50 years with one long blink. But when she opened them again, the weight of decades sat heavy in her gaze. "It's me," she said softly. "It's always been me." Silence pressed against the walls, heavy and smothering. The party outside still roared with laughter and music, but inside, the family's foundation shifted. The next hour dissolved into confusion. The TV was muted, kids shuffled out, and Denise locked the front door. The younger cousins whispered about cops showing up at the barbecue, while Marcus paced like a man on fire. "You mean to tell me," he said finally, "we've been living our whole lives, and you a damn fugitive?" Lorraine's voice cracked, but her tone carried steel. "I've been your grandmother longer than I've been anybody's fugitive." Denise sank into a chair, covering her face. "Lord, Mama, they said 2 guards died in that robbery." "They did." Lorraine's eyes dropped. "And I didn't pull the trigger, but I was there." The words hung, fragile and dangerous. "You lied to us," Marcus snapped. All these years. You let us sit in church every Sunday, calling you the example, and you out here with blood on your hands? Lorraine leaned forward, her hands gripping the cane tight. You think I don't carry that blood with me every day? You think building this family, raising y'all, keeping y'all safe, was easy? I've been running from who I was so you could be who you are. Denise swallowed hard, tears spilling. What happens now? Mama, what happens when they come for you? Lorraine lifted her chin, her eyes glinting with something between fear and defiance. They already coming. Question is, do you all stand with me, or do you let them take me? That night, long after most of the guests had left, Marcus sat on the porch, trying to process. His grandmother, the woman who taught him to fish, who slapped the back of his head when he cussed, who slipped him $20 bills, just 'cause she was wanted for murder. From inside, he heard Denise's voice rise in anger, then soften in pleading. He heard his uncles arguing, one saying they had to call the police before they got dragged into something bigger, another shouting that you don't hand your mama over to the feds. Lorraine stepped outside, slow and deliberate. She sat beside Marcus, her perfume faint, mixed with the night air. I was 19, she said quietly, a fool in love. Man told me he was going to change the world. Said the money was for the revolution. I believed him. Next thing I knew, shots were fired, men were dead, and I was running with blood on my shoes. Marcus didn't speak. His throat was tight, his chest heavy. I didn't mean to be no killer, Lorraine whispered. But once they put your name in red ink, it don't wash out. He turned to her finally, searching her lined face, the truth sitting there like a scar that never healed. So what now, Big Mama? He asked. Lorraine looked toward the street, the night holding its breath. Now, she said, we wait, and we pray the past don't come knocking before morning. By morning, the heat had already found a way into the walls. The house smelled like last night's grease and perfume and sheet cake. It should have felt like any morning after, a little messy, a little sweet, but the silence had a shape now, something with corners. Nobody wanted to speak too loud, in case it made the whole thing real. Denise moved like a ghost through the kitchen, clearing plates that didn't need clearing, wiping a spotless counter. Every so often she pressed a palm to the wall, as if to steady the house itself. Marcus sat at the table with a yellow legal pad he didn't write on, just tapped the pen against the margin. The TV stayed off, like it might mouth something they couldn't swallow. Lorraine came in dressed without anyone noticing, the lavender shawl, a white blouse starched to a crisp halo, the same gold cross she'd worn to every funeral and wedding. She set her cane against the chair and took a breath that made a soft whistling sound in her chest. Before anybody else tells my story, she said, I'm going to tell it. Denise's chin lifted. Her eyes were puffy and red, but there was steel in the line of her mouth. We listening. Lorraine's gaze moved from face to face, as if she were counting heads at bedtime, and the number had never changed. Y'all know me as Lorraine Jacobs. But before that, I was a different kind of girl. I was Evelyn. Evelyn Price from the south side of Chicago. I knew how to count money and read faces and run fast in the cold. I knew men who wore their righteousness like a leather coat heavy and creaking, but underneath, they was always cold. She let the images rise, and they came easier than she wanted. Chicago in '75, brick in gray sky and smoke, flyers stapled to telephone poles with words like freedom and solidarity blacked in thick marker. She'd worked as a bank teller by day and poured coffee to union boys by night. That's where she met Moses Gray. Moses had a voice like thunder you can feel in your bones, she said. Said we were going to break the system that crushed us. Said we'd take what was owed and put it back in our own hands. Told me it was for the people, for us. Marcus shifted in his chair, jaw ticking. He knew that kind of gravity. The way someone stands too close to your need and names it destiny. They planned the armored truck, Lorraine said. Said no guns, said we'd scare them guards, be in and out. But men with plans is just children with matches. Fire does what fire wants. When the guard reached for his weapon, Moses fired first. The other guard fired back. It was noise and red, and all I remember is my hands shaking and my knees numb. We ran. I ran because I was 19, and I had never been that close to death, and I didn't want to stay. Denise's breath hitched. You told me my daddy died in a plant accident. You said Chicago wasn't safe. That's why we came to Texas. Lorraine's eyes settled on her daughter, the woman she'd raised from a wail to a prayer. That's because some truths wear masks so they don't burn the house down. Baby, your daddy ain't the man you think. Denise's hands curled where she held the dishcloth. What are you saying? I'm saying you mine because I carried you and fed you and watched you sleep, but I didn't give birth to you. The words came as if they'd been waiting behind Lorraine's teeth for decades. Your mama was named Ruth, Ruth Lane. She was my friend. She got mixed up in the same fire. When it burned too fast, it took her. She died the winter after, fever and grief, and left you squalling in a crib in a cold apartment with the radiators banging like gunshots. I took you. I loved you like God handed me a second chance. I called you mine. Because you were. Denise stared at her, and for a moment there was nothing human in her gaze, only raw animal confusion and fear. She sank onto a chair she hadn't known was behind her, and laughed once, a sound so thin it snapped in the air. You stole me? She whispered, I saved you. And I've been waiting my whole life for forgiveness I couldn't ask for. Lorraine's voice wavered. I didn't tell you because Moses was still out there. He'd come sniffing around once in '82, right when I first got to Houston. I hid. I learned how to live quiet. But quiet don't erase nothing. Denise put her face in her hands. Marcus reached for her, but she flinched before dropping into his side, like she'd fallen, and he was the only soft thing in reach. He wrapped an arm around his mother, as if he could hold together the decades with his forearm. From the front room, a car engine idled on the street, a low purr that didn't belong to any neighbor they knew. Marcus looked through the curtains and let them fall. We're not the only ones listening for your truth, he said. Lorraine nodded, the set of her mouth resigned. That'll be them. Or him, or both. Who? Denise's voice was hoarse. FBI, maybe. Or Moses. Either way, the past got good ears. The doorbell rang. 3 tones. Not eager. Patient. No one moved. I'll get it, Lorraine said finally. She stood and lifted her chin like heading into church. Marcus stepped in front of her. No, ma'am. I got it. He opened the door to a woman in a sun-bleached Astros cap, big sunglasses, and a denim jacket despite the heat. Her hair hung in 2 tired braids. Lines carved parentheses around her mouth. Up close she smelled like menthols and motel soap. You Evelyn? She asked. Who's asking? Marcus said. She lifted the glasses. Her eyes were deep-set and sharp, the kind that once learned every street by foot. Name's Ruth Lane. Before you get to hollering, I don't mean the dead one. Lorraine's cane slipped against the tile and clattered, and for a second she was 19 again in a doorway filled with winter. Ruth, she whispered. I thought. You thought I was gone. I was supposed to be. Ruth's mouth twisted. Truth is, I went underground, had a baby to protect. She looked at Denise like someone surfacing from a long dive and seeing the sky for the first time. You got tall, girl. You look like your daddy around the eyes. God help you. Denise was standing before she knew she'd moved. She took one step toward the woman and stopped, a baby deer on shaky legs. You're my mother. Ruth laughed softly, which sounded like it hurt. I guess I am. And I know I ain't earned the right to call myself that today, but time doesn't let us pick the order. I'm here because there's more than feds coming. Moses is in Houston. He the one who leaked that photo. He needs Evelyn talking wants to know if she told anyone where the stash is. The stash? Marcus said. Money, Ruth said. We didn't take it all that night. Couldn't. He hid what was left before he skipped. I think he planted it here, back when he was hiding out, before he ran on to Dallas, and then Atlanta. He's likely back now for the last dig. Denise wiped her cheeks with her palms, anger flaring through the grief like a match. So this man killed 2 guards, made y'all run for your lives, and now he wants his retirement money? Over my mother's head? I wish it was less ugly than that, Ruth said. But ugly got simple needs. Marcus glanced outside. The Buick parked across the way hadn't moved. And the FBI? Ruth's jaw worked. Agent name Holt. White guy, hair cut too short, like he tried to square himself into the job. Been calling my burner, saying he can help me if I help him bait Evelyn. I figure he'd be waiting, see if you run to him or to Moses. She slid her eyes toward Lorraine. I'd like it if you run to me. Lorraine studied her old friend like a photograph. She'd folded and unfolded until the edges rounded smooth. I've been running all my life, Ruthie. Maybe today we stop. What are you proposing? Marcus asked. We make Moses come to us, Lorraine said. We tell him the stash is at the old storage off Scott Street, the one with the orange doors. He used to keep a bike there in '82. He'll believe it because his ego's louder than his memory. He shows. We record him. He confesses, even if it's just to scare me. We got his voice on the dead. Then we walk to the Fed who hasn't been sleeping, and we lay the whole thing down on a table. Denise's head snapped toward her. You willing to risk that? He could kill you. I've been dead every day. I didn't tell you the truth, Lorraine said simply. This way's cleaner. Ruth leaned back, measuring the gamble with the eyes of a woman who'd been counting risks since she learned how to count. We'll need an extra set of eyes and a way to talk without him hearing. Marcus tapped the legal pad. I know a girl at the barber shop who does podcasts. She got mix and knows how to wire a room cheap. And my boy Deshaun works security at that strip of businesses. He can cut the camera feeds to a loop for 12 minutes at a time. Laurent's mouth curled a touch. You got everybody, huh? Community, Marcus said. It ain't just a word. The storage compound sat behind a pawn shop and a Cajun takeout spot off Scott. The orange doors faded to the color of cheap tangerines. Heat rose off the concrete in shimmer lines, and the only shade came from the skinny crepe myrtles planted along the fence, like they'd been told to be pretty and shut up. Deshaun peeled off his security jacket and handed Marcus a badge on a lanyard. 12-minute loops, he said, chin toward the cameras. Start when you see the black Tahoe turn down the side street. That's Holt's wheels. He been circling all morning. The other car, the Buick, been taking catnaps. Appreciate you, Marcus said, slipping him a folded roll of cash. You ain't see us. The podcast friend, Tasha, had already planted 2 tiny micks, a button on the undersurface of the metal latch and a second inside a foam cooler marked fish bait. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of trespassing on history. You sure you want this out there? She asked Lorraine quietly. If I record this and it gets posted, you can't unring that bell. Lorraine touched the cross at her throat, and the top of Tasha's hand, still soft with youth. Some bells we've been waiting to hear all our lives. Ruth sat on an upturned milk crate, chain-smoking like it was a job. Every ash flicked away was another breath closer to the next moment. Denise stood beside her, arms folded, shoulders squared, a woman trying on a mama bear body in a mirror, seeing it fit. You got any pictures? Denise asked, voice careful. Ruth dug into her pocket and pulled out a plastic sandwich bag with 3 photos and a folded paper gone thin at the seams. She handed them over like an apology you could touch. The first photo was black and white. A younger Ruth with hair in a halo, smiling like she had no idea she'd need to hide that smile for decades. The second was a man Moses, with that preacher fire in his eyes and a jean jacket collar turned up. The third was a baby in a knit hat, cheeks fat, mouth open toward the camera like the world had been trying to tell her a secret since day one. "That one's you," Ruth said. Denise made the small, involuntary sound that comes out of a body when a piece clicks into place it didn't know was loose. She kept her eyes on the baby like the baby was a time machine, and if she stared hard enough, the present would explain itself. The folded paper was a deposit slip from a storage unit, dated 1982. The name scrawled in courier pen, E. Gaines. "Fake name," Ruth said. "He liked to borrow other people's letters." "What's the plan if he shows up with a gun?" Marcus asked. Ruth blew smoke. "Then we make sure his mouth runs before his hands do. You stick close to Evelyn. I'll stand in front. He never trusted me enough to shoot me in the front." Denise looked at her, a flicker of a smile showing through the mess. "You sure know how to comfort a girl," Ruth smirked. "I'm out of practice." They didn't need to wait long. The Buick from the block slid into a space like it had been born where to park. Behind it, the black Tahoe crawled past one driveway and then another, never in a hurry, eyes everywhere. Cameras clicked to loop. Marcus sent a quick text to Tasha. In the reflection of the orange door, they looked like ghosts. Moses stepped out in a linen shirt the color of old paper, hat pulled low. He was older, sure time had drawn maps under his eyes, but the swagger was intact, a storm that refused to admit it had lost its thunder. He saw them and smiled. "Ladies," he said, voice still carrying like a sermon. "Evelyn, you look good for a dead woman. Lorraine didn't flinch, and you look old for a devil." Moses's smile widened. "You always had a way with words." He took a step closer, and Marcus stepped to match. Moses clocked him, the possessive set of his shoulders, and laughed softly. "Grandson, is it? You look like you could carry a story." "Speak yours," Marcus said. Moses spread his arms as if giving a benediction. "I hear you remember where we left our tithe." "It was never tithes," Lorraine said. "We stole it." "You shot those men." Moses shrugged. "Casualties are the grammar of revolution." "You ain't a revolutionary," Ruth said, coming around the end of the unit, ash hanging off her cigarette like punctuation. "You a thief who found a soapbox." Moses's eyes slid to her, amused. "Ruthie, I thought you were smarter than showing your face." "I got smarter in the dark," she said. "But today, I need you to hear me." Moses lifted a finger like a conductor calling a single note. "Hush, we're old. Our bones are tired. No need to play at ghosts. Give me the key, Evelyn. We all go home." Lorraine leaned on her cane, and for the first time since he arrived, her face softened with something like pity. "Do you ever dream about their faces?" she asked. "Do they climb into your sleep and ask you why?" Moses's mouth twitched. The veneer cracked a hair. "I dream about 1,000 faces, child. I dream about dead boys in alleys, and dead girls in basements, and a country that lets them rot." "You want me to repent for making the ledger honest for one night?" "You didn't make it honest," Lorraine said. "You made it bloody." Ruth flicked her cigarette and let the ash fall like snow. "We recorded enough. Say the names." "Why?" Moses's voice sharpened. "So you can hang me on a podcast? So these kids can feel righteous between sponsored segments?" Tasha's eyes peeked over the unit, one down, phone in hand. He'd clocked her without even looking. A cold bead of sweat rolled down Marcus's spine. Holt's Tahoe slowed on the far side street. Lorraine stepped forward before the moment found a gun. "Moses," she said, "I'll give you the key, but you say it. Say you shot them. Say the plan was yours. Say you made us run." Something old flashed across his face. He looked at her like he always had, the girl who hadn't been afraid of his light, and therefore had to be put in his shadow. For a heartbeat, he seemed to consider a softer script. Then the old arrogance lifted his chin. "I did what had to be done," he said, voice low. "I fired first, because the world always fires at us first. They died because they stood in the way of history. And I would do it again, Evelyn. I never ran. I moved forward. You ran," Ruth snarled. "You left me to bury a girl alone." Holt's Tahoe turned down the lane. Doors opened. Men moved. Moses's hand went to the back of his belt and came away with a small pistol that looked bigger than it was because of the way it made the air change. Denise's breath came out in a sob that had no tears attached. "Don't," Marcus said, stepping half a step in front of his grandmother, hands empty, palms out. "There are too many watching. You shoot, you die today. You talk, maybe you see another sunrise somewhere that ain't the free sky." Moses's eyes flicked between them, the calculus turning behind his pupils. He aimed not at Lorraine, not at Ruth, but at the camera above them, a petty swipe to control the story. He fired. The glass popped. Tasha flinched and ducked. That was enough for Holt's men to react. "FBI, drop it." What happened next happened like a song you already knew the words to, but hated anyway. Moses pivoted, raised the gun not quite high enough. Holt fired first, then another agent. 2 shots, 3 each louder than the last. Moses staggered and sat down hard against the storage door, confusion on his face like the blood was a weather report he hadn't checked. The pistol fell against the concrete and spun in a small circle until it stopped. Lorraine's cane clanged to the ground as she moved without it. She dropped to her knees beside him like a woman arriving at an altar and pressed her palm to the wound that didn't care. "Hush," she whispered, "because that's what you say to the dying, even if they've been trying to kill you your whole life. Hush now. Say their names for once." Moses's lips moved. If they made sounds, they were too thin for anyone but Lorraine to hear. His fingers twitched around her wrist, once, like he had a last note to play, and then remembered he no longer had an instrument. He let go. The concrete took whatever was left of him. Holt approached with his gun leveled, gaze sweeping for extra danger, like danger was a person he'd learned how to find in a crowd. He looked at the dead man, then at Lorraine, then at Ruth. He looked at Denise, whose hands were fists at her sides, and at Marcus, who stood breathing like his body had been both bathed and beaten by the heat. "Mrs. Jacobs," Holt said, clipping each syllable as if it were a form field. "You're under arrest for flight to avoid prosecution and accessory to." "Don't," Marcus said, the word raw around the edges. "You saw what happened. You saw what he said. We have it recorded. He confessed." Holt cut his eyes to Tasha, to the dark eye of the small button mic under the latch, to the cooler marked fish bait. "We'll need all of it," he said. "You'll get it," Ruth said. "Every second. And you'll get a copy of a copy, because I might be old, but I ain't dumb." Holt's mouth did a small thing that might have been a smile if it weren't so tired. He nodded. "Nobody said you were." He read Lorraine her rights, voice steady. When he said, "Anything you say can and will be used against you," Lorraine said, "I know," and it sounded like she meant her words were finally good for something. They processed her at a federal building downtown with an air conditioning so cold the fluorescent lights looked like winter. The desk agents spoke to Lorraine without looking at her face, eyes on screens, lips moving around the vowels of her name like they were chewing something tasteless. One took longer with the printer when he reached the line for race, as if the box were heavier than the others. In the waiting room, Marcus sat beside Denise and Ruth. Holt came out twice with questions they didn't answer, and once to ask them to calm down a man in handcuffs, who'd started crying because the cuffs hurt, and nobody had told him who would feed his dog. After a while, A lawyer with braided hair and a suit that looked cool even in that artificial cold approached. "I'm Kaisha Rowe," she said, "public defender. I'm good at this, which is lucky for you, because they haven't assigned you anyone else yet." Marcus looked up, hope flaring and then tamped like a match lit in wind. "Is she?" "She's old. She's cooperative." "And you have a recording," Kaisha said. "That doesn't erase the fugitive charge. It doesn't erase accessory, but it bends the light. Plus, the FBI shot the guy who'd have loved to testify that your grandma was the devil. Sometimes the universe writes your cross-exam for you." She took their statements until her pen ran out of ink, and she switched to a pencil, which made her look like a schoolteacher taking notes on a pop quiz. After, she folded her hands and leaned forward as if she were about to give a blessing. "You should prepare for the possibility that she'll see a judge today and go home on a conditional release. Or 3 nights in custody first. Or house arrest. Or a monitor. She might have to plead to a lesser charge for the flight. Maybe probation if we're lucky. The DA in Illinois is going to want a piece of this. But time has a way of eroding appetite." Denise nodded slowly, like she was learning to speak a language she'd been hearing all her life, but never understood. Kaisha stood, "And y'all should eat. Knowing and not knowing burns more calories than a treadmill. There's a cafeteria down the hall that's better than prison food, worse than church potluck." They waited. The building's clock moved like it was dragging a stubborn shadow. When Lorraine came out with a plastic bracelet on her wrist and a paper bag of belongings, she was flanked by Holt and another agent with eyes like unpolished stones. Kaisha met them and spoke in low tones, and it felt like watching adults exchange spells. "Home," Kaisha said finally. "You got a monitor on your ankle and more appointments with me than you ever wanted. But home." Lorraine nodded like she understood the financial terms of God. Holt stopped them at the door. He looked like a man who'd never learned what to do with his hands when he wasn't holding a gun. "For what it's worth," he said, "my mother is from 5th Ward. She used to say the worst thing a person can do is steal time. He stole a lot of yours." He cleared his throat. "We'll be in touch. Don't leave town." Denise lifted an eyebrow. "Where we going go?" Holt almost smiled. "Fair." The monitor itched where it rubbed Lorraine's ankle. She sat on the edge of her bed the first night home, a glass of water sweating on the nightstand, a fan clicking as it rotated slow as a sermon. Denise appeared in the doorway and leaned against the frame. "You hungry?" she asked. "I ate with y'all," Lorraine said. "Are you sorry?" Denise's voice was neither a knife nor a hug. It was a fishing line cast into dark water. "I'm sorry for the hurt, not the saving," Lorraine said. "I'd steal you again." Denise swallowed, eyes hard, a storm building that would need somewhere to go. "You don't get to claim me and then hand me a new name." "I don't need to name you to love you," Lorraine said. "But you got a right to your blood. We'll find what we can. If you want to know his people, we'll look. If you don't, we won't." Denise stepped into the room and sat on the bed. For a moment, they looked like what they had always looked like, mother and daughter talking into the quiet. Denise took her mother's hand without looking at it, and their fingers interlaced like muscle memory. "I prayed last night," Denise whispered. "I asked God how to forgive in a way that doesn't make me a fool." "And what'd he say?" Lorraine asked. "He said 10%. Denise wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and snorted. "Start with 10%. Increase is tolerated." Lorraine laughed, surprised at the sound in her own throat. "That's good medicine." Denise nodded. "We'll increase as tolerated." They had to learn each other again. At the store, strangers glanced at Lorraine and then at their phones, like her face might jump out of a news app any minute. A cashier called her "Ma'am," with the same mouth that said, "You people," when the price scanner glitched. A deacon from church left Denise a voicemail with too much concern and not enough kindness. The mailman asked for a selfie for his daughter's criminal justice class. The world expanded and shrank in the same breath. Ruth stayed in a motel off the freeway, where the ice machine made a sound like old bones shaking in a jar. She and Denise ate breakfast together at a diner where the eggs were, always a little underdone, and the waitress remembered coffee orders but not names. They unraveled the knotted rope of their pasts one thread at a time. Denise heard about a young Ruth who'd wanted to be an artist, about a winter with a bad cough and a radiator that clanged like a judge's gavel, about a man who came back once to make sure a secret stayed buried. Ruth learned about Denise's first-grade teacher and the church choir solo, and the way Marcus had held his baby sister like a football the day she was born. Sometimes they fought about small things, because the big thing was too big to fight without breaking the furniture. They made up because they were both too tired to stay angry in a world that gave them so many other reasons to be angry. Marcus went back to work because rent and justice don't pay each other. He cut hair and listened to customers argue about the Texans and the price of eggs and which street was getting gentrified faster. He watched men set their mouths to hard lines when the news mentioned Lorraine. He watched other men soften, drop money in a donation jar for her legal fund, clap him on the shoulder like he'd taken a punch for all of them. He learned where he went when he was tired, under the live oak by the bayou where the shadows made shade that felt like an old aunt's cool hand. Tasha posted the audio after Kaisha gave her a legal green light. She edited out the part where Denise's breath broke and left in the part where Moses said, "I would do it again." The episode streamed more than anything she'd ever uploaded. Comments under the episode argued about revolution and theft and whose blood counts more. Someone tried to dox Denise. Half of Houston tried to tell the story back to them in shorter, uglier sentences. Kaisha filed motions that sounded like the careful stacking of dishes. The Illinois DA called. The Houston DA called. Reporters called. Holt called to say there would be a hearing in August. They marked the date on a calendar and then forgot to flip the page because time felt like a trick door. The night before the hearing, thunder rolled across the city like a rumor coming true. Rain popped off the sidewalk and ran into gutters that took it like confessions. Lorraine sat at the kitchen table with a stack of letters and a pen that refused to give up. She wrote to the guards. Families, and to Ruth, and to Denise, and to Marcus, and to the unborn child Denise's sister was carrying. She wrote like she was stitching something, thread biting her finger until it calloused. Marcus came in and leaned against the counter. "You ready?" Lorraine looked up, eyes soft and fierce at once. "I've been ready since the day I wasn't." He took a breath. "I want to say something tomorrow. To the judge. Not like a speech, just a thing from the heart." "Say it," Lorraine said. "Words only rot when you leave them alone too long." He nodded, then grinned crookedly. "You know, you're still scary." "I keep the kids out of the street," she said. Fear got uses. The courtroom was beige and wood and chill. People shuffled in wearing their Sunday best on a Tuesday. The judge had the kind of face that looked both kind and permanently inconvenienced. The guards' families were there, 2 women around Lorraine's age, and a man with a jaw like he'd spent his life biting back his own grief. There were television cameras that craned their mechanical necks toward the humans, as if hoping a soul would leak through a lens. Kaisha spoke, careful, her voice a scalpel that cut only what needed cutting. She said words like mitigation and duress, and the long arm of circumstance. She played the recording. Moses's voice filled the room like a weather pattern. The guards' families closed their eyes and flinched in different ways. Denise reached for Ruth's hand and didn't have to look to find it. Holt testified. He was measured. He didn't make himself a hero. He said he'd been pursuing a cold case and it happened upon a woman who had made a life. He said the law is a net, and sometimes the fish you catch are not the ones you set out for. He did not smile. When it was Lorraine's turn, she stood slowly and took the oath as if repeating a promise she already kept. She told the truth she had. She ended with, "I loved a girl named Ruth Lane and a baby with no name and a God who kept seeing me even when I didn't want him to. I ain't asking for a pass. I'm asking for a way home that ain't hide and seek." Kaisha touched her elbow and asked if anyone else would like to speak. Marcus stood. His chest felt like a drum someone was beating gently with the pads of their fingers. "My grandma taught me to shell peas, patch a tire, and not confuse quiet with weak," he said. "She taught me crab boils and how to look a man in the eye and how to leave some for the next person. She did a bad thing to get out of a worse one. That don't make it good, but it makes it complicated. If you got to punish her to make the book right, then do it. But make the book honest, too. The man who shot those guards said he would do it again. The woman who ran has been making a life that says she wouldn't." The judge looked at him with that expression that meant she was hearing more than she could admit. She asked the guards' families if they wished to speak. One woman stood, hands shaking, and said, "I've been mad so long my anger got old. I'm not ready to forgive you, Miss Price or Miss Jacobs, or whoever you are. But I am ready to stop waking myself in the night to rehearse pain. I hope they bury that man in a place where nothing grows." The judge nodded. "Thank you." There was a recess where everything paused without stopping. Kaisha came back with a small smile that could mean anything because hope was a reckless thing in rooms like these. The judge returned. She took her time with her words. She acknowledged time past and harm done, and the math that didn't add clean when you put them together. "Miss Price," she said, "you eluded the law for decades. You built a life. You also contributed to harm. The court will sentence you to time served on the accessory charge. Acknowledge your cooperation and the newly discovered evidence as significant mitigation, and impose 2 years of probation for flight, to be served in home confinement for the first 6 months, followed by monitored community service with organizations of your choice, subject to approval. You will make a recorded statement to be placed in the public record regarding your role in the incident, so future cases may see the texture of remorse." She paused. "And Ms. Lang, the state of Illinois has dropped any remaining warrants in light of your cooperation and the preservation of the recording. You are free to start again, if that is still a thing." Ruth snorted a laugh that sounded like a sob. "Judge, I've been starting again since 1976. The judge's mouth twitched. "May you finish once or twice." The gavel sounded softer than anyone expected. It had the tone of a door, closing gently instead of slamming. Home confinement turned their house into a small country with borders marked by tape and bureaucracy. The monitor chirped sometimes, as if to remind everyone it was in charge. Lorraine did her community service by mentoring girls at a neighborhood center. They allowed it after Kaisha argued that wisdom is service. She sat in a circle with girls who had too much bravado and not enough adults, and taught them how to handle cashier math and how to watch a man's hands when he talks. She told them 2 kinds of stories, the ones that made them laugh and the ones that made them quiet. She didn't tell them which one was more true. She let them decide. Denise and Ruth worked on a family tree at the kitchen table with a laptop that overheated like a nervous person. They called numbers that had gone stale and knocked on doors that hadn't expected knocking. Sometimes they found dead ends. Sometimes they found cousins who cried on stoops and brought out boxes of photos. Sometimes they found nothing but a porch light and a stray cat. In each place, Denise learned a new way to say her name that made room for more than one woman. Marcus stayed late at the shop, caught heads, and listened without telling. He wrote down scraps of sentences at red lights and in the barbershop bathroom, on backs of receipts, and on the inside of an old lottery ticket. He started a folder on his phone called Stories and filled it with other people's lives until he realized he was making a map back to his own. The first Sunday they went back to church, The air felt different, like a brisk wind through a room someone forgot to dust. People looked at them the way folks look at a bruise on a friend's arm, curious, protective, judging. The pastor preached on names Abram to Abraham, Jacob to Israel, Saul to Paul, and the congregation hummed at every turn like they were singing along. After the benediction, an old man in a brown suit shuffled up to Lorraine and shook her hand for a long time. My brother marched with men who thought they could unscrew the world and put it back on straight, he said. Most of them died, thinking the world got the better of them. You sit down beside me and breathe. You hear? We gon' breathe for them today. Lorraine sat. They breathed. The note of it rose and fell like music. Late summer rolled in heavy. Houston swelled with the heat, cicadas yowling at dusk like they had a chorus to lead. The ankle monitor came off with a beep and a soft click that made Lorraine laugh because it sounded like nothing for something that had shaped so many days. The skin beneath had a pale ring that would fade with time or not. She touched it and said a small prayer without words. That night, the family gathered in the yard again, not for a birthday, not for justice, but because the world had not ended and that deserved fire and meat and music. They strung lights under the oak and rolled the cooler out, and the smell of charcoal got in everyone's hair. The dominoes clacked. The kids ran with sparklers in the brief dark, like they were writing messages to the sky. Ruth sat on the steps with a paper plate in her lap, watching Denise across the yard. Denise glanced back and smiled before turning to correct a kid aiming a sparkler too close to his sister's braids. There was a kind of grace in domestic scolding. Marcus wandered over to where Lorraine sat in her wicker chair, shawl draped, a queen crowned by porch light. He handed her a slice of watermelon and a bottle of water with condensation that ran and made her fingers slick. You ever think about leaving again? He asked. She shook her head. I left too much. He nodded. You know we still mad sometimes. I expect so, she said. If y'all weren't, I'd think you were pretending to be nice to me to get into heaven. He chuckled. You think we gonna make it? Heaven? She asked. Through this, he said. This being a family with too much story. She smiled, thin and wide at once. We been a family with too much story since God said, let there be. The trick is not letting the story be the only thing. We got breakfast and jokes and bills, and somebody's foot gone find a Lego in the hallway tonight. That's life. The story sits with it, not on top of it. They watched as Denise and Ruth argued gently about whose potato salad was better, which was a good sign because it meant someone believed there would be more potato salads to argue about. The radio played Frankie Beverly again, because some songs insist on returning the way the tide does. The gate creaked, and a courier walked in with a padded envelope, confused by the party. Lorraine Jacobs? He asked. Lorraine raised a hand. He handed it over and retreated gratefully when someone pressed a plate into his free hand on the way out. Lorraine opened the envelope with her thumb and pulled out a manila folder and a small box wrapped in blue paper. The folder held two things: an old newspaper article, yellowed with a photo of two guards in uniform, and a note from one of their sons, scrawled in clean, patient script. Ms. Jacobs, I don't know how to feel about you, but I heard you tell the truth. I wanted you to see my father's face when he was young and foolish and full of himself in a way that made him loud in a crowd. He loved fishing and bad jokes and my mother until they were all he had. I want you to know I'm tired of the wait. That's not forgiveness. It's a tiredness that looks like peace from far away. Maybe it will grow into something else. Maybe not. Either way, we're done being enemies. Take care of your family. J. Whitlow Lorraine touched the faces in the photo. Come sit with us a while, she whispered to the paper and set it on the table beside the dominoes. The small box held a delicate silver necklace with a tiny key charm. No note, just the glint of a thing meant to unlock and not to bind. Lorraine laughed softly, unbidden tears sliding down the lines of her cheeks. From who? Marcus asked. Lorraine glanced at Ruth, who was smiling from the steps with a secret only mothers know. A woman who doesn't want me to go digging in old places again, Lorraine said. And a reminder that some locks don't need opening twice. Good, Marcus said. We got enough new doors to open. The moon slid up over the roofs, nodding like a grandmother who'd seen it all and still liked to sit for the show. The party rolled on. A kid tripped and cried, and then laughed when someone put a popsicle in his hand. Someone started singing low, and somebody else found a harmony. Lorraine closed her eyes and listened to her house breathe. It sounded like little feet and big voices, and the rustle of grace moving through leaves. It sounded like the past tapping at a window and being told, as kindly as possible, that it could sit on the porch if it liked, but supper was for the living. She opened her eyes and caught Denise's gaze. Her daughter, her baby, lifted her chin. That small movement that said yes, and also, I'm still thinking about it, and also don't rush me. Lorraine nodded back. They would increase as tolerated. Ruth sat on the steps and let her shoulders drop in a way they hadn't since another life. Holt would probably call again, and some reporter would find a new angle, and the city would keep grinding away at everyone, because that's what cities do. But the lights were warm, the night was thick, and for the first time in 50 years, nobody was hiding. Lorraine touched the cross at her throat, and then the little key lying cool in her palm. She thought of a girl in snow running until her lungs burned, and of a woman in heat stepping out from behind her own name. She thought of a baby in a knit hat, and of boys in uniforms, and of a man who died thinking he was still the center of a storm. Bless this house, she said under her breath, like a spell, like a dare. Bless these names, bless these hands. Around her, the world kept talking. It had always been loud. Tonight, it sounded almost kind.